everything will become a little bit clearer and it'll feel a little bit less everyone's scrabbling around. And I think that's my hope. It's not a dying industry in any way, shape or form.
No.
It's just an industry that's growing up a bit. Going through that phase will also be really interesting.
We're in the lanky, awkward preteen years. It feels like
vases off of
things
shelves.
are getting a bit hormonal. Hello, and welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, a podcast about the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belinkie of NJB Media, a podcast audience development strategist.
And I'm John Kiernan of Podhouse Productions, an all-in-one podcast consultation and editing platform. We're co-hosts on this journey into the world of podcasting as a monetization tool.
Whether you're building branded content, scaling a podcast network, or you're just getting into the podcasting industry, PodBiz breaks down the strategies, tech, and mindset behind podcast success.
We're bringing you insider tips, real talk with industry professionals, strategies that actually work, and talking all about the things that we've seen in the trenches.
So if you're ready to go beyond the downloads and build real impact with your podcast,
then hit subscribe and let's get down to PodBiz.
Welcome to PodBiz. Today we're joined by Helen Parker, Managing Director and co-founder of Strange Magic. We'll be speaking more on the monetization side of production today in terms of building out those teams and working with brands. It's a really interesting conversation, and Helen's experience in terms of tech to podcasting to production to now running retreats in Ibiza, Spain to help you launch your podcast. It's a really interesting one and a really interesting journey. Let's get down to PodBiz. Helen, welcome to PodBiz.
Morning, how are you?
So excited that you're here with us today. Helen, let's get straight into it. Where's the money in podcasting?
I think for a lot of people, it feels like it's everywhere and also nowhere. And I think that I really felt like that. Obviously, we met at the podcast show in person for the first time. We met before that. But it really felt like that there. There was a lot of talking about big numbers and a big game, but also with people who were maybe more independent or creative. You know, it was a little bit of a whispered like, and how are you making money out of this? You know?
Like, how are you making ends meet, paying the rent, figuring it out? Yeah,
exactly. So there was a lot of posturing. And actually, I really like it when people get together in person because it stops being a massive like LinkedIn post.
Gosh, absolutely. I mean, the LinkedIn success is everywhere out there. And it's very interesting. I think, podcasting is still such a young industry. So in a way, we do have the fake it till you make it mentality still, which is very real. But at the same time, we're all still figuring it out, right? And we see that across the board, right? We see that with big ad on the platform side. We see that with indie creators. We see that with production houses. It's really across the board that everybody's still kind of figuring it out. And, I do love being in person because it's been a very interesting shift on the creative side, which we'll get into, because there's been layoffs and now a lot of creative people, a lot of producers are starting their own production houses, are doing really interesting different projects, which we'll get into. You have a couple of really fun projects coming up, but also owning their work and owning the IP and saying, hey, if I create this and this is my idea, I'm going to get a cut in perpetuity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, in serious answer to your original question, I think that it is in a lot of places. So you have to go and get it from a lot of places. And I know this is something that a lot of your guests have talked about, but I think when I first came in to the podcasting industry from tech, I keep saying it's 5 years ago, but I think it's longer than that now, 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
There was easier money to be made. There was lower hanging fruit. It was a land grab by the commissioners to get people to use their platforms. Platforms have died away that we've now completely forgotten about, or been subsumed by other people. At that point, you could just go to someone and say, I've got an idea. Do you want it? And the content distributors, for lack of a better word, or platforms, they wanted as many subscribers as possible and they wanted to be the last man standing. So it was the equivalent of when I was in the tech boom. And people were spending money because they knew in 3 years there wouldn't be as many people around. So they had to be the one that survived and the one that people set up their subscriptions with. And now we're in a completely different stage where the industry is flattening out and settling down. There isn't that like investment, like money floating around.
We're not getting that VC speculative minimum guaranteed wild cowboy time. I talk about this a lot here on PodBiz. It felt like in Dallas in 2022 at Podcast Movement, it felt like there was an invisible money gun going around and everyone was just like trying to, on one of those game shows where you're in a tiny little booth and you're trying to just catch as much of it as you can, it really felt wild. And Spotify and Amazon, they were all kind of vying for subscription membership at that time. And there were a lot of moving tectonic plates in the industry. There still are, but not in the same way. We're not getting that big influx of tech money that we had 4 or 5 years ago. And so it's definitely interesting to see how things are shifted. And I think you're right. People who had production experience it was a smaller pool of people 5 or 6 years ago. The people who had the opportunity to study narrative, beautiful audio and to make great audio stories and work and gain that experience pre-podcast boom, it was a small club. And so everybody who kind of had that experience, had some ideas, could go out into the market, get funding, do great things. Yeah. And now what we're seeing is that those deals look a lot different these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And actually, to some extent, that means there's more, everyone's willing to share the money that, is there a little bit more. It's like your success is my success is a phrase that you hear a lot more now.
Yeah.
Whereas before people had a pot of money. Also commissioners, I think there is this maybe this false feeling that you hear people moaning about it a lot, that commissions are kind of sitting there not giving out this like big pot of cash. And I also don't think that's true. I think they are, as we've seen with some of the layoffs, is they are as much worried about their jobs as the people who are freelancers, the people who are production agencies, and they have to make a show that is going to be successful, and they only have a certain amount of budget to do that with.
And they only have a certain amount of times that they can take a risk, right?
Yeah.
And go up to their stakeholders, right? When we're talking about people who work for large companies, and I've had this conversation off the record quite a few times, right?
Yeah.
With people when I'm pitching work or friends are pitching work or I'm working with people on a pitch, it's something where I can prove value of the impact of the work that I do, but the person who I'm pitching to probably also has to get buy-in from stakeholders further up the chain. It's rare. And so what we're seeing is that the chances that people take, they're still taking chances on speculative work, but it's work that already has guaranteed audience built in. So a lot of the time now we're seeing influencer podcasts, we're seeing celebrity podcasts, and people do complain, right? Celebrities aren't podcast hosts and da-da-da. And at the same time, right, there are the anecdotal examples of Amy Poehler and folks like that. And also, if I'm an executive and I need a guaranteed win, right, to be able to make great work in future, to be able to continue my career, it's looking very similar to how entertainment has traditionally worked in Hollywood, right? Where a lot of actors will do a big studio movie in order to, get a big paycheck to be able to make an indie movie. And so we're kind of seeing that shift. And, for that being said, a lot of people listen to talking head interview podcast shows.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of people listen to podcasts that make it feel like they're hanging out with friends and they're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the spread now is probably more sustainable of podcast types. And I do personally believe that the industry has to go through this stage. We talked about it when I was at Chalk and Blade podcast, which, built up very naturally, organically. And we talked about the fact that we kind of knew at the point, in 2021, we knew we were in a boom and we knew it was a land grab. And actually it was about, setting up, thinking forward a year at all times about the content you were pitching to be sustainable.
For sure.
And some of the content's coming back as well. There's narratives seem to have suddenly had a bit of a flux. Because now the commissioners are more experienced. They know what they're looking for. They know they need something to actually happen at the end of a podcast narrative series, for people to keep listening. And they're trying to build a brand around, for example, Serial's done really well, right? At building a brand around, we deliver every time. If you listen to one of our story arcs, whether it's documentary or narrative, depending on kind of what category you put it in, but what they're doing is picking things where they know at the end you'll be satisfied. So you will put the effort in as a listener. You have to, where there's a discoverability problem now and you're vying for listeners' attention, if someone's going to spend money on you, then, and commissioning your idea, then they have to feel like there's a reason for you to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that people's time and bandwidth is more and more valuable I got to say, I love Serial. The last 12 weeks was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Their latest series.
This weekend.
Oh, so good. Shout out to New York Times and Serial and all those folks. I mean, just beautiful work. And obviously, they've done a great job of tying great journalism and long form, beautiful narrative content to the kind of trust and investigative journalism that the New York Times is known for. So it really is a beautiful extension of their work. But I definitely see what you mean, right? In terms of how audiences have expectation on delivery. And they know like, okay, great. It's going to be another, not to continually nerd out about Serial, but it's going to be another great arc, right? It's going to be another S-Town. It's going to be another Serial. Yeah. I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to be both entertained and informed. And so I do definitely get the sense that that branding aspect is so important and that buyers are looking at their slate like a mosaic, right? And you really have experience. I want to talk next about your experience within the podcasting industry because you have experience pitching work, working with brands, working with buyers.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, you have a tech background and tell us a little bit about how you got started in the podcasting industry and then Chalk and Blade and that whole arc. So your whole narrative arc.
Thank you. So I was in tech. I worked in big corporate tech, actually worked in the States for a little bit as well, managing development teams of, I think the max was like 150 people across 12 countries and all the different time zones, and really enjoyed that. And then was part of the tech boom originally straight out of university. So did the boat trips in Ibiza, Wolf of Wall Street style sales floors, etc. And that was really fun. I was talking to someone about it last week, selling products before we built them, which is quite reminiscent of each other. Actually, the podcasting.
Absolutely. And the amount of people that are like, I'm building a game-changing platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Sign up
it was
for our launch
precisely.
announcement.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also people exactly the same as I've had in podcasting being, I remember sitting with someone in a retail platform that I was working on and them saying, I don't want to disappoint you, Helen, but I don't think that shopping online is going to take off. And I was like, you mean in this specific category? And they went, no, I mean this Amazon thing. I was talking to my friends about it down the pub and I just don't see it really going anywhere. I was like, okay, I'm going to leave now because I don't think I'm going to convince you about the internet today. And that was only 15 years ago.
Wow.
So I think, and I feel the same sometimes with podcasting. So going off on a bit of a tangent, but people being like, it's not going to,
it's a fad.
Had its day. It's a fad. And you're like, no, it's here. Like
it's
too
here.
many people have spent too much money.
It's changed the entire media landscape.
Yeah. And it is a medium with its own, set of advantages on engagement that other people don't have. But anyway, and then I worked on, interestingly, something I always wanted to turn into a podcast. I worked on a piece of technology that did in an auction house, when you take bids from the room and you take bids from the internet, we did the bids from the internet. It was really fun and actually extremely difficult technically.
Were you using algorithms at the time in terms of auctions?
No one was. It was so...
Okay.
It was actually so old school.
It's giving eBay, right? Where you just keep upping and upping.
Yeah, except that it's live.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. That's wild. I mean, nowadays with how ads are bought on social media and also in podcasting, right, with programmatic, we see it.
Yeah.
Just the real-time bidding and people who write auction algorithms. I mean, I've heard stories of these people. I have some friends who work in tech outside of podcasting. And if you can write auction algorithms, you can do whatever you want, wherever you want in the world. You can write your own ticket. Yeah. It is a wild technology. Yeah. But early days, it was in real time. And so it would be like bid, next bid, next bid, next bid.
Yeah, and you have to have someone in the room.
Yeah. Just being like, what's next? No, it's the online one. Yeah.
I'm in the background of quite a few bargain hunts where they were like, because the auction, people who do the clerking at auction, not to disparage them at all, but they're not dressed for TV. So my team, because we always turned up professional, they'd be like, could you just come in and and like stand around looking like you work here, because they'd always be in suits and,
There's something to be said for first in, best dressed.
Exactly. So we did that, and it eventually got not top in the market, but, came from nothing to being second in the market. We finished that for various reasons, but I then was working at the VC office, basically, and we were approached by Chalk and Blade to talk about us building a studio. And at that point, the technology in studios wasn't great. So actually, it looked like quite a big investment.
Yeah.
And so I did all the due diligence on them. I'd also become, as you can imagine, driving around the auction houses of the UK at the time, an early adopter of podcasting.
Yeah.
So I was very excited about the idea of having anything to do with anything fancy that wasn't, tradies or, standing in an old warehouse. And we looked at the industry and we're like, this is amazing. This is a boom market. This was 2019.
Yeah.
And basically thought the investment would have been great for the investment company, but not great for Chalk and Blade, because they didn't really need the money.
Yeah.
Thank God that happened, because then the pandemic happened. So building a studio would have been a very big mistake at that point.
Yeah.
But where they were looking for someone who had a business head to join, I basically joined a day a week and then hang around until I was there full time as the managing director. So, and that happened over the next kind of few years. So it was really fascinating during the pandemic to see the boom that happened, but also coming from a tech background and the tech boom. And I also understood a lot of podcasting is tech, actually.
Yeah,
and that's the bit that people kind of miss, is it feels like it's very simple, but actually the tech, the lack of analytics, it's all still a very young industry. And actually that's what interested me the most. And also, I also like the creative side of stuff and joining the creative with business goals, which is kind of what I've been doing previously in my career, working with retailers and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and it's always interesting to kind of, number one, follow our curiosity. And everybody who works in podcasting, I think, at this point was a fan first. The industry is too young for us all to have had careers in podcasting. No. We talk about that a lot. But it's also something where, when we're talking about building a career in podcasting, when you are at conferences and you kind of meet a lot of people and you kind of get your foot in the door, it's something where a lot of the folks are real tech platform nerds. Right? Yeah. And so it's a combination of creativity and media, and a lot of media literate people, and a lot of people who have this like startup cowboy tech feeling to them. So the industry has this texture of both. And so for definitely. A lot of people, they get to exercise their creativity, or even, in business, feel like they're utilizing their creativity a little bit more, because we're still in an era where you can make deals and go out to market, and things aren't so established that, everybody just kind of now has a corporate job. It's moving that way a little bit, but on the creative side, it's actually moving the other way.
PodBiz is brought to you by Lean and Loaf, our video podcast partner. Because running a podcast is so much work outside of just recording a podcast.
Lean and Loaf handles our entire post-production pipeline, getting everything platform ready. That way we're not chasing files or managing editing timelines every week.
We really recommend Lean and Loaf. It's been phenomenal. We're a 2-man team. And so for us, it's been fantastic to have the additional support to focus on the content of the show and the incredible guests we've had on.
And really get down to answering the question that you want to know the answer to. Where is the money in podcasting?
Lean and Loaf is trusted by some of the biggest names in the podcasting industry. So we're in really good company with folks like iHeart, HBO, and Netflix.
If you want to take a load off and take your podcast to the next level, head on over to leanandloaf.com.
But I want to talk more about Chalk and Blade, because they did great work, right? It's
wonderful.
Phenomenal, right? Where we're talking about premium production, branded, commission. So tell us a little bit about the growth, because you were there almost 6 years.
Yeah, so when we started, built completely organically. So, as you'd expect, the first few years were under $500,000 of revenue, and then built up over the next 6-7 years. I should say that Chalk and Blade is no more, but not for monetary reasons. It always remained break even, which is also quite a feat in this market.
Absolutely.
And the owners have gone on to do other, I'm sure, great things. So we were always told we should have a niche. And we always said it was about quality. And that has actually stood the test of time.
Yeah.
We worked in the entertainment space. We worked on, not necessarily always on, but very often on shows.
Yeah.
We did TV companion podcasts for the BBC, one of their biggest. We did investigations. We did some great, especially Audible in 2024-25. We did some wonderful investigative journalistic pieces, Coatbridge particularly, and Madman's Hotel.
Yep.
Which were also very worthy, for lack of a better phrase for that word. But it really felt like we were working for something for a reason. It was a privilege to work on shows that had a purpose.
Yeah.
And were trying to achieve something in the real world, alongside, some really great branded content, which was more my side of things.
Yeah.
So I did contracts across everything. I did talent contracts across everything. I did the commercials.
Yeah.
But I really focused, because I enjoyed it, on the branded and organizational side. So the last big pieces we worked with TUI, one of the biggest travel companies in Europe, on their podcast called Pack Your Bags with Russell Kane. That was really good. That was about matching their business goals, and the goals were different for each series to the content and the creative and the guests, and making sure that, it really cut through in the market. And also one of the biggest ones we worked on is UNICEF. Podcast, which was UNICEF and the World Health Organization and Gavi. And they wanted to do a show which we called Our Big Shot, about the power of vaccinations and making sure that people understood what a big achievement it was worldwide to have so many people vaccinated, but also the importance of keeping on with that. And making sure that we still continue to invest in vaccines and trusting in science and medicine. And we did some really nice bonus episodes with that, actually, that I produced, that were about talking to science deniers and about working together when you don't have funding in the science field. So there were some really lovely episodes of that. But again, it was about matching what they were trying to achieve as a messaging and their corporate goals to a creative, and being the liaison internally at the production company that made that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's something where, when somebody is listening to great work, a lot of the time they hear a host, they don't necessarily know how many people and how much labor is going into a show. So when you're putting that together, right, you're pitching sometimes to the client. I love a branded podcast, right? A lot of my clients are...
I love the fact they don't usually have ads.
No, they don't usually have ads. And a lot of brands really want a show that's going to have loyalty, that's not going to be an infomercial, right? They want something that's going to create the halo effect for them of really allowing the brand's values to shine through and showcase that the brand cares about, whatever industry or topic. So it's one of those things where a lot of the time brands are getting the result in terms of impact, and also audiences are getting just a great narrative journey. And I mean, most of my clients are branded on the audience development side. And so I can talk about branded podcasts all day long. But I do want to say, in terms of some of the work that you've done, I want to hear both sides, right? Number one, in terms of putting those teams together and making sure that, you come in under budget. And number two, proving concept and pitching to brands and pitching to BBC. And pitching to CBC, pitching to a lot of the UNICEF, a lot of the organizations that you've worked with about buy-in, about budget, you know? And I always am like, okay, marketing should be equal to production. And that doesn't happen most of the time.
Me too.
Right? It's like, can we have some money to market this podcast? And it's like, ooh, we spent all that money making it.
Yeah. I think the most important thing I've learned over the years of working with brands, we've worked at all different levels. For example, you would think that we did Vogue's podcast, and the TUI team that we needed for that treatment was much bigger than what we needed for Vogue, the Closet Digest. It was a much smaller team for that because they did a lot of the work. So I would say they did a lot of the work on getting, as you can imagine, Vogue has a lot of clout in getting guests in.
Yeah.
So, that
we're all pretty good at getting guests, but if you have a Vogue signature in your email, it might be a little easier to get all the fashion folks. Yeah.
To get them to respond very quickly. I think it's about being honest.
Yeah.
That's the biggest learning that I've had. Being honest on all fronts. Firstly, about what it's going to take and walking away if it doesn't make sense. Then Secondly, at being honest about what results they're going to get. You have to remember that for brands, they're used to the kind of CPA, they're used to their advertising being in the views on their website, views on their ads being in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And re-educating them about what benchmarking is in the podcast industry.
And the fact that somebody spent an hour with your brand.
Exactly. I always use the example of if you were walking into Wembley Stadium to go and watch someone give a talk, then, as you were driving down the motorway or as they were listening to the radio, the number of ads you could hit them with in that time would be really, really high. And the number of people you could hit would be really, really high. But someone walking in and sitting down and listening to you for an hour, it's a lot less people that you can fit in the stadium, but it is a lot more impactful and it will stick with them.
Yeah.
And a brand has to be authentic in how they're talking to people. So there's no point in pitching or making a treatment that isn't authentic to the brand. You can't greenwash or any kind of wash, that people try and do. We've all been in those meetings where they want to make something that you think no one's going to listen to that.
Yeah, it's a big advert. It's a big advert. It's incongruent to the actual impact they want to make, right? It's going to do the exact opposite.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is being in the pitching side is being very respectful of brands and the fact they do know their audience and they do know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I've worked with people who can be a bit sniffy about what a brand wants in the branded space, especially if there's someone who doesn't really like making branded content, which I love. But you do get people who want to be making their real soul is in a narrative documentary.
Oh God, right. Like this professional production moment, this exact situation needs to be the outlet for your creative project. Yeah. Absolutely not. Yeah,
exactly. And I think respecting that a brand, for example, TUI were brilliant at knowing their audience, knowing what they wanted, knowing who they would listen to and vote. I mean, all of our customers were knowing what they wanted and knowing what's going to engage them, what content should and shouldn't be included, what will cause a problem for them. They're the paying customer and it's up to them. And you should listen to them as much as they should listen to you. Going in with a treatment without having understood what they want and what they need. Their entire job is understanding their audience and trying to grow it in the way that they want. There's no way you can catch up with that. And you'd be in marketing earning,
right,
6-figure salaries.
You wouldn't be in the podcasting, scrappy podcasting industry, right? You wouldn't be with all of us audio nerds. No, not at all. It's definitely interesting. And I do feel like brands absolutely know their audience. And what I've seen in terms of the way that they lean on podcast production and marketing and audience growth, which is more kind of my wheelhouse, is that they really are looking for platform and podcast specific expertise, right? How to make things that sound great, how to get the arc of a story to be good.
Yeah.
They're not looking at who's our audience, right? Absolutely. They're not saying like, who's going to listen? I think that, and it's really important as a marketer when you're looking at those demographics and you're saying, okay, what are the demographics of your brand? How can we target that with a podcast? And are there any demographics you're not reaching that are huge potential, right?
Yeah.
Or that have an opportunity to grow your product base or your membership base, subscription base, that kind of thing. And then how can we reach those with great storytelling, with the visuals of the podcast artwork, with a great trailer, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely.
Yeah. And also the people in the podcast industry also get sniffy at people wanting to make the kind of radio documentary of old as as an idea. And we can all be
I think they're great
about that sometimes. But if your target market is people who enjoy listening to those, there is no reason not to do it. You can also add creativity and add layers and add messaging and introduce them to, by the way of segments or whatever, to make it significantly different enough. But I think there is a place for every type of content if it's the thing that the audience wants to listen to. So it's about identifying what the audience that you have wants, what they're used to. You want to make it frictionless. Like, we're not here to educate people on different types of podcast shows. We're here to make something that will entertain and engage with them. And I think that's the most important thing. And those things will make money because people will be engaged.
Absolutely. I think it's so important to remember not to have to reinvent the wheel. right? Like it's okay to do what works. And that's why I think we're seeing this rise of the celebrity talking head podcast. And a lot of them aren't necessarily going to make it long tail, but I do think we're seeing that because people are like, oh, that works. Oh, that has a built-in audience. Oh, that person has a built-in following. And then we see if they're media literate or not. And, I'm not necessarily opposed to it if the content is good. And I don't think anybody is really opposed to any podcast if the content is good. The best podcasts that we all find are the ones where someone DMs you, you're getting a direct message, word of mouth, and they're like, you have to hear this. Or you're on a call and someone's like, have you heard this incredible podcast? A lot of the time it's like, a new thing, like we just nerded out on Serial in the last 12 weeks, but it could also be like, this one guy makes it and, he's doing his own thing and it's so great. Or, this comedian from LA or, whatever it is. I do think that there is data on this from Edison Research. And we've had Tom Webster here on the show talking about the number one discovery tool for podcasting is word of mouth, right? The number one way people find podcasts is because people recommend them. Then the number one digital discovery platform is YouTube, which we've talked about extensively here. Wild. I do have to say though, I think that the discoverability challenge, I don't want to say problem, the discoverability challenge is interesting because we're at this fun inflection point of, yes, podcasts aren't discovered through an algorithm on podcast directories. They are on YouTube, and that's probably why YouTube is the number one discovery tool. But one of the great things about podcasting is that when you open Apple Podcasts and when you open Spotify, now Spotify is pivoting a little bit these days, but when you open, you're not served an algorithm. You're served the content that you directly follow, that you say, I like this and I'm going to follow this, and you're only going to get that. And you can go on to the main page, right? You can go on to the Apple podcasts they love and podcasts that are recommended on the homepage and go through the different categories or charts and all that. But at the same time, you're not being consistently spoon-fed, algorithmically based content, which is where most of the rest of the world is going. And so I think because of that, podcasting is still a bit refreshing.
Yes, I agree. I do think it's quite interesting. I've been experimenting a bit with GEO, so asking about podcasts and seeing what the AI platforms come back with. And I do think it's important that people pay attention to that because that's quite fascinating because, again, it's not really a rabbit hole. It says, you might like these 3 podcasts and that's it. And that's, that's the only ones you're getting.
Helen, you are spilling the tea. I have to say, the way that AI and Claude and Gemini and Chat GPT are working these days is if you're on the audience development side, you want your client's podcast to pop up when people search for it because the way that people are using AI tools and platforms is for recommendations, is to learn things. And so if you make sure that your shows are indexed within AI, it is helpful.
And also that's why transcripts actually make quite a big difference.
Oh God, don't they? I'm the biggest proponent of transcripts. Ugh.
Yeah. And having a splash page, we definitely I've seen with various clients, the conversion rate going up when you use a splash page.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the various platforms. But when you use it, I've used Linkfire a lot and I found that really makes a massive difference because it's about being frictionless. And in a world where people are used to asking one question and getting one answer, having people not make decisions around podcasting is how you're going to get more listens. I mean, you know this, but
and we're inundated with data these days, right? Like nobody wants to make a decision anymore and nobody wants to sit in the quiet dark of their life anymore, right?
No.
No one's ever alone anymore unless you really intentionally want to be, right? No. There's always a podcast or a reel or a TikTok or an email or, even when you're not working, the line is so blurred between work and not work these days. Yeah.
I heard an amazing stat, and I don't know if this is true, but it feels true to me, says every non-scientist ever. They said that the amount of information someone used to get in medieval times is the same as we get in their entire lives, is the same as we get now by 11 a.m. And that really
tracks. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that feels right. Yes.
That feels right. I feel like I'd love to get a fact check on that. Maybe we can do that in post-production. Maybe not. But I do feel like that is probably absolutely true. I think about this a lot, actually, in terms of the number of people that I know. I mean, I've lived in a lot of countries and I've done a lot of different things. And everybody, that works in podcasting primarily has had a career outside of podcasting. And so when you think about the amount of people that you've met in your lifetime, 500 years ago, you would have met 200 people in your whole life.
You would have known the names of every single person you'd ever seen.
You would have known the intimate details of everybody in your village, right?
Yeah.
And now, in the day and age, we have parasocial relationships where people feel like they know creators, they know celebrities. I mean, the way that people are, just ingrained in the lives of absolute strangers, the influencer economy, it is wild. I mean, imagine putting something on the internet and having millions of people see it. It's unfathomable.
It's interesting. Even in that concept, for me, it's why podcasting really works as an engagement medium. Because how many times have you been halfway through saying to someone, I had a friend tell me the other day, and halfway through the sentence, you've realized it wasn't a friend. It was somebody on a podcast who was telling a story. You don't know them at all. You've never spoken to them. They don't know who you are, but you've taken on their story as part of the kind of fabric of your life. It's a really weird.
It's bizarre. It's so bizarre. I actually have a non-podcasting, very parallel, embarrassing thing that happens to me quite a lot. I grew up in Los Angeles, and just tangentially, celebrities were kind of around. And I just have met in the course of my life so many people that when I see a celebrity, and I have just kind of the way I was brought up, if you see someone you go say hi, right? So I have this habit of going up to celebrities thinking that I know them. It is mortifying. So if you're watching this and you're well known and I've come up to you, I am so sorry, Harry Styles.
I'm familiar.
Oh, it's happened several times. It's terrible. The most recent was Harry Styles. It's so embarrassing. Like, I remember going up to one of the Baldwin brothers in a restaurant when I was a little kid thinking he was this guy from my dad's office. Like, just terrible. Terrible.
It's probably a good litmus test of if they're a good person or not.
I mean, who knows? But at the same time, I think that there is this parasocial thing where it's not even that you're fangirling. It's that in your subconscious, just the familiarity of that other person's voice, or the fact that they're bringing to the table, or even their face, is imprinted in our brains and in our subconscious. And it's a wild time to be alive.
Yeah.
Well, Helen, you pivoted out of Chalk and Blade because that, like you said, that company was really successful, but not everybody wants to run a big podcasting company.
Yeah.
And as a result, that shifted. And now you are the managing director and co-founder of Strange Magic. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So myself and my business partner, who's a woman called Sam Walker, who has been in America for quite a while. And
I met Sam in America. Yep.
Did you?
Yeah.
And she is now, we're really pleased. I'm sure America is sad, coming back to the UK. We moved her into her new house last week.
Good.
The rest of her stuff is still traveling across the Atlantic somewhere.
Yeah.
But so she's come back. She is very experienced exec producer. She made American Vigilante, makes loads of really good shows, has worked with loads of really good brands as well. Yeah. And we were talking to each other anyway about doing something before she was thinking about moving back.
Yeah.
And then we really identified this, hopefully, kind of area that's happening in podcasting at the moment where, it is a stretched industry. It is normalizing. There isn't lots of buckets of cash, to go around everywhere. And one of the things that people seem to need, but not on a permanent basis, is adults in the room who've done it and had the experience for a long time, but they haven't got necessarily the work, because it is a fast famine kind of way of working, especially for the small production agencies, whether or not it's one or two people or a bigger agency, or it's an ad agency, or it's a brand, having someone who they can bring in-house very quickly to do a production, or to work on a production with them, or as a co-pro. So we're basically pitching ourselves kind of as a kind of filler, but also doing our own shows. And I've been working with a film production agency where they had exactly the same kind of use case that I described there, where they had started working on a project with a very, very, very good producer, but they didn't realize, because it looks so simple, the amount of work that a podcast production documentary.
One person can't make a whole professional podcast, Helen?
No. Yeah, exactly. And also, I think if you come from TV and film, there is this idea, and this is not.
We just talked about this. Stella Young from the new podcast, This Is TV Now. We just talked about this, where it's like, the phenomenon that like 20 years ago, they were like, we'll just have the intern manage all the social media. And now it's like, we'll just have one person make and market and produce an entire podcast. And it's like, what? Yeah, it's not feasible. And also, the juice has to be worth the squeeze, right? The ROI has to be there. And we've talked about this, and the whole industry really has been talking about this for a long time, right? Don't make a podcast unless you're willing to really make a podcast. And then we're off to the races, right? Like, let's do this. But at the same time, we don't recommend shoveling everything onto one person's shoulders, having them be overwhelmed and then burn out and then be like, oh, podcasting doesn't work for us.
Yeah. And also someone who can deal with clients who, can be, so
that client relationship aspect is huge.
And it's not really fair to put that, in my opinion, on junior producers anyway. It's not their MO. They haven't got, the years of experience of managing stakeholders across, organizations. They're also not going to be able to answer the marketing questions, etc. that, that people have, or be able to turn up on a call and run it and say, no, that's not possible. This is possible. We can do this, and keep a project on track.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of times, I've been on calls with people where it's like, okay, let's deep dive into your analytics. And there's no stupid question. And also to be honest, the average person in the industry isn't doing that work, right? It's become so nuanced and niche. And I think as podcasting grows, right, we're seeing where okay, client facing roles are becoming more valuable. Production is its own thing. Let's please not make all of the junior producers do all the client facing work and marketing and audience growth. Those poor junior producers.
I know. And also they're just going to burn out, or they're not going to achieve, or your client knows as well, So anyway, we're basically doing independent productions ourselves, which we've got a couple coming up, but also we're building the business because we like working in the industry, not building it to sell. So I don't think there's capacity for another production entity to come into the market who just takes commissions and is trying to build up or network. Really, at this point, we're probably not willing to put the sheer volume of effort in to build something from the ground up to compete with the people who are currently doing it and are well funded. Would be a bit mad at this point, I think, unless you really have the appetite for it.
And I think there's also something to be said about work-life balance, right? I think
exactly.
For everybody who has that kind of big corporate career, that's great. You get the benefits, and then you have a little bit more money sometimes you have more money to kind of pad your life in other ways. But I think for people who need a little bit more bandwidth for their family or for their life balance, or, just because creative work is so intense, it's helpful to have that freelance work. And, I do want to have this conversation in terms of rates, because freelancers should be paid more, right?
Yeah, and I was reading actually a really good post on LinkedIn, because obviously it takes up way more of my time than it should.
Likewise.
But they were making the point that when you're, and I've been in the position as a production agency hiring freelancers, and I'm doing at the moment as well, with Strange Magic Studios for some of our projects. But they said the problem when you're the employer is that you take the day rate and you times it by the number of days in a week and then by the number of weeks in a year, and you go, oh my God, that's X amount. Well, actually, nobody hires like that. That's not how freelancing works. You'll always have gaps. At the moment, especially, a lot of stuff is 2 or 3 days a week. So actually, they did the calculations of what that actually works out as. And they were saying that's why, and I have always agreed with that. In tech, that's why developers always got paid more, because you needed their expertise and you needed it very quickly and you needed them to be reliable. And therefore it was higher than if you had to go to the expense of finding that person in-house. And having them in, and then you've got all the risk that person, if they walk away with, especially in tech, they get poached by someone and they're gone in a month and no one knows how this bit of code works, I think we are at a stage where market rates are quite set, which I think is a good thing as well. And I hope and I think that freelancers are kind of sticking with them now in a way that they weren't, I think, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Of what they're charging, because they can't survive if it's less than what the market rate is.
It's very interesting. I'm hearing both sides of that, actually. I'm hearing a lot of folks say that they know people are taking work for lower rates because they need the money. And then I'm hearing other people say, we're holding our ground. So I think it depends on the market and the kind of work you're doing. And a lot of buyers, I think, they also face internal pressure, but it's something where you're thinking, oh, budget. You're not thinking this person's health insurance, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's a very American problem specifically, but it is very real, right? Or like this person's kid's summer camp or school fees or whatever it is, right? So I do think it's important to kind of understand that, like, as the industry grows and, anybody, I guess, over a certain age is just going to have like life responsibilities.
Yeah, I think so. And I think hopefully it will work itself out if people hold their ground. I also think it'll just become unsustainable, which I think maybe is what we're seeing now, that the people who have dropped their prices then can't sustain.
That's exactly what we're seeing
at that price.
I mean, with a lot of the layoffs, I've heard of people going to nursing school.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought about becoming a dentist.
Yeah.
Briefly. I was like, dentistry is really expensive. Maybe I could become a dentist and then that would fix all my problems.
I love it.
I think also, that's another thing that's quite interesting. I was reading the Infinite Dial report.
Yep.
Podcasting has increased more 2025 to 26 than it did 23 to 24, which I thought was fascinating as a starter.
Yeah.
But then also that it was only fourth down the table, the reason for people making a podcast to make money. And actually, a lot of it was about help. And this wasn't in Infinite Dial, this was in the other report.
Yeah.
And I thought that's quite interesting because I do think that was a myth about 3 years ago that isn't happening now, is this idea that you could make a podcast and that would be your entire job and that would be fine. And that would be you forever. And actually, that's about 20 people in the world who are doing that and managing to do it.
Yeah. And what we're seeing actually is that a lot of those creators are having to branch out, right? They've built subscriptions. They are on social. They're influencers.
It's actually a community.
Oh my gosh.
It's about community. I used to run a forum site at one point in my life as well. And actually this now, marketing and managing a podcast feels more like that. Now it feels like a community of people that you are receiving revenue from in different ways because the way you are offering it meets them where they are. And benefits them at that point. And I think no one is making money unless you are, top tier of listenership. No one is making money off pure advertising, on programmatic advertising on podcasts.
We've even had, some of the top advertising companies, Oxford Road, Triton. We've had a lot of incredible guests come on and say programmatic is a piece of it, right? These creators are so...
Yeah, Triton were quite clear about that.
Yeah, and they're so careful, creators, about their audience and just the stewardship of that they don't want to alienate with programmatic. They want to create communities where they have ongoing subscription income. And there's so many different avenues that creators can explore, especially once you hit certain numbers and a certain level of success. Absolutely. Well, Helen, what would you say is one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and the success of the clients and the work that you've been able to do?
I think being direct.
Yeah.
I honestly, this is from a piece of feedback from a client where we went out for drinks to an award show, and I said, "Oh, someone told me in the office I was really direct. So I think I'm actually amiable." She was like, "Yeah, you are, but you're not. You're also direct." She said, "I remember ringing you up and saying we basically couldn't get a guest on. It was a weekly show, and we'd arranged someone that I knew would be a really good guest, but the client didn't really know that well. But I knew it interacted, and I said to them, look, you can either have this person right now or you won't have a show this week. And that's kind of the bottom line." And they just went, oh, okay, yeah, we'll have them then, and put the phone down. And we're like, oh, I got blindsided into that. But they ended up being their best performing guest of the series.
Amazing.
But I think it's being really upfront with people. The directness is the same as you can flush things out quite early.
Yeah.
If it's not going to work as much as if it is going to work by being honest with people.
Absolutely.
Fail fast, but also don't overpromise. What success looks like at the end of a project is equally as important as giving them hope at the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's about hitting the balance between that. If you overpromise or you give them the best possible outcomes, it will... in the end, you will find that they will be disappointed. And whereas if you gave them the number that was kind of mid in the beginning and said it was down to them and their marketing and how well you achieved your goals together as to how much it was going to work, then that is when they will feel happy at the end, because it will feel like an achievement because it is, and because they understand what you all had to do to get there.
Absolutely. I think there's also just a huge educational piece when working with clients that aren't, entrenched in the podcasting industry, right? I mean, just there's so much education on the production side, on the metric side, on the audience development side, on the ad buying side, on paid placement, on organic placement, on production management. There's just so much in terms of educating the client. And also, like you said, being really transparent about where their expertise is and what their goals are. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Helen, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
That it takes a lot more people and it's a lot harder work than people think it is. I would say from outside the industry. If it's from outside of the industry, I'd say, like, if you're in the podcast industry, prepare to be underestimated about the level of work everything takes at all times in your career. In terms of branded side in the podcast industry, I would say I work with a really big brand. I can't say who they are, but the biggest piece of learning, which they'd be fine with me sharing, is that we did a brand uplift study with them after we'd done a podcast, and we had been so worried about them wanting to make something an advert. So there's this really big bit of research that someone did with car brand years ago, where they found when they took the logo off of the ident for the podcast, the listens went up by 30%. So we've always, and the same, there's always been all these stats around, like, don't push it, don't make it feel like an ad.
Yeah.
So we've been really careful to make, from the beginning, from the outset, kept hammering that home. When we did a brand uplift study, the audience said they could have taken more of the brand. And they actually, even though the brand was mentioned 4 to 5 times in each episode and there was an ad for it, they said they could have taken more. So I would say, actually, that was a massive learning for me.
Yeah.
That there is also a brand recognition thing, and people are used to adverts. So if you're making branded content, they probably will swallow more adverts than you think that they will for the brand, as long as you put them in the right context and it's
right
clear.
Context, right place in the episode, and really soft touch, right?
Yeah.
Here's what the company does. They've brought you this episode, right?
Something that engages with the audience.
Yeah.
So the episodes that they did notice it on was where we'd mentioned something that was a real life example for that brand of where they'd helped someone or something like that, where you just say their name. It's almost like in the old days, we used to call it banner blindness. Yeah. So if you went to a website, you knew where the banners would be, so you'd stop seeing them anymore. And I think it's the same thing in podcasting.
Absolutely. And there isn't, your brain doesn't click into reality. Yeah. It's just a word or a brand.
Yeah.
Right.
It's why host-read ads work, and they're much better because the moment that you know you can switch off, your brain gets distracted by your phone. So I think there is a balance.
The moment you know you can skip an ad, you might.
Yeah. And I think there is a balance. And I think with how easy it is to change content, even after you've released an episode, I think doing A/B testing and seeing what works and polling your audience.
Testing, polling your audience, A/B, there's so much out there where I think people think, okay, it's a one-way street. But podcasting, because it's a digital medium, you're really getting a lot of feedback based on audience behavior, based on consumption rates. I mean, it's so interesting. Even like a lot of platforms you can comment or ratings and reviews. I think that there's so much feedback that we actually do get from the audience. So it's important to ask for it and then to make decisions based on that. Absolutely. Well, Helen, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
When I first moved into the podcast industry, I think I felt like an outsider to a lot of an extent.
Oh gosh, that is such a common answer here on PodBiz. Everybody feels like they're left out. And then they're in the industry for a couple of years and they look around and they're like, nobody knows anything that I don't know. And we're all just figuring it out. Okay.
Yeah. And I would have gone up and I probably would have gone and talked to people a bit more and got to know more of the geekier people like yourself in the industry. I feel like it's only in like year 5 that I started to talk. After I was interested in like the stats and there
does seem to be a divide, absolutely, between folks who are more on the creative production side and folks who are more on the platform ad analytics side of things. And I mean, I'm someone who has experience in both, bridges both. And I think that's why PodBiz is such a great vehicle, because we want to have the conversations about monetization from platform, from creator, across the industry. But there does seem to be a divide where people who do production work are thinking, I'm a creative person. I don't need to know about consumption rates. I don't need to know about the death of the download. I don't need to know about how ad tech works. And it's helpful if you do take the time or have the opportunity even to check in. Absolutely. Well, and you have a couple of really cool projects in the works. You're doing a retreat in Ibiza. Like, take me with you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, obviously you've come from something that was like full-time. And now you're like, okay, I have this skill set. We're in an industry where I can do fractional work because there are productions that need really skilled people who have client-facing experience where I can jump in. But it also leaves room for you to do more creative stuff on the business side as well.
Yeah. So one of the kind of passion pieces for me in this industry is I think there's enough space for everyone. But I think if you're not working in either a bigger production company or you're not working in certain areas of expertise, it's really hard to access those. And I think you see that with the success of quite a few of the shows around it, as in conferences that people turn up to, and they're looking for advice on how to market, even though they're the creative side. As we've said, it's hard to do it all because it's such a broad skill set. So I'm working with an amazing producer and broadcaster called Jo Yule, who runs her own podcast, but also lives in Ibiza. And we've talked for ages and ages about doing a retreat. And what we're doing is in end of September, beginning of October, we're doing called Podcast in Paradise. And we're hoping to take it to other places as well. It was originally, the concept was like a writer's retreat where you left feeling like you'd rejuvenated your creativity and your podcast and you had ideas, but with a kind of spin on it for the podcast industry and to what I was talking about before, where we're doing the creative side, kind of 2 tracks, where it's the creative side and, doing some recordings, seeing other people's recordings, getting some coaching and training, as well as just re-examining, what you're doing, how you're managing your podcast, but also a business track about marketing distribution, where at the end of it, you'll walk away with what I do for bigger agencies or for clients. I will do a document with them that they'll walk away with for a 12-month plan for marketing distribution and how they put their podcast out into the world, how they're positioning it, what the market landscape looks like, and walking through that over 3 days and helping them build ideas and sponsorship opportunities within the space that they're in, and on a real kind of one-to-one coaching whilst also in kind of workshop groups with other like-minded people. So the idea is to give people the facilities that you would get for, it's kind of an investment, I suppose, in the next 12 months of a podcast to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And getting all the facilities that you would get if you had access to lots of experts, and we've got lots of different guests coming along with it, that you would get to take your podcast to the next level and start to really build it up from where you are, both in terms of the creative and a bit of a rejudge, as well as how you actually are going to take it to market and what you might have been missing just because you haven't had the time to think about it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a phenomenal idea. I mean, I had this idea a while ago and then my life went in a different direction when I was living in Indonesia. But it's something where, I think starting a podcast is so intimidating to people to enter an incubator and say, okay, I have maybe an idea, or I've started a podcast, or I'm not really sure where it's going, and to just sit with experts for, several days in a container where you have that expertise at your disposal is powerful. So very excited to hear how that goes as well. Yeah, absolutely. And it's in sunny, beautiful Ibiza.
I know, just as we'll all be grasping the last bits of sunshine.
The last
in the UK.
bits of the summer. I know. September is like the last good month before it goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Helen, what are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry besides going to Ibiza?
Definitely that. But also, I think I'm excited because I think it's entering a stage where it's going to be easier to predict. I think it's been ever changing, this landscape.
We're all just like, hold on. Where's it going?
Exactly.
What's happening? Who's hired? Where are the jobs?
Yeah.
What are the rates?
Shall I do video? Shall I not? Watch YouTube?
Yeah.
What's this? Should I be thinking about TikTok? It's
how many shorts per episode? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And I think it's becoming more predictable. And I think the formula, so far, there really has been no formula for success. And I don't think there ever will be, tick boxes, and that's a question I get asked a lot. when I'm working with different companies and on podcast shows.
Yeah.
But I think what there really is, it will start to feel like experts become experts, and you'll know where to go to get expertise about things. And you will know that if you put spend in this bit, it will work, and you will get this many, and you'll know what people should be charging. And as the industry gets into the next phase, teenage phase, I like to call it, then everything will become a little bit clearer, and it'll feel a little bit less everyone's scrabbling around. And I think that's my hope. It's not a dying industry in any way, shape or form.
No.
It's just an industry that's growing up a bit. Going through that phase will also be really interesting.
We're in the lanky, awkward preteen years. It feels like
vases off of
things are getting a bit hormonal. No, it's definitely an interesting time in podcasting. And I absolutely agree. I think as podcasting's growing up, we're all kind of learning, and Yowei Shaw from Proxy, who Dane Cardiel quoted here on the show, is that we're all just growing old together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing.
which is very true. Well, Helen Parker, managing director and co-founder of Strange Magic, thank you for joining us here on PodBiz.
Thank you. It was so nice to be here. Thank you.